Welcome to the Museum of Antiquities. My name is Weston Dowie, and I'm the Social Outreach and Engagement Coordinator here at the museum. We're taking part in the 2021 Heritage Festival of Saskatoon, a fantastic celebration of our shared culture and history here in the city. Today, we will be looking at artwork from one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, the mighty Acropolis of Athens. We'll learn how replicas are one of the best ways to preserve this site. These panels from the Museum of Antiquities are fine plaster replica segments of a marble relief once displayed within the Parthenon temple on the Acropolis hilltop of Athens in modern Greece. The originals can still be found in Athens, but are now displayed within the new Acropolis Museum. The Acropolis of Athens is an ancient hilltop citadel that has been a central part of the settlement for millennia. Associated in myth with the goddess of wisdom Athena, the Acropolis functioned as both a fortress and a religious site over its long history. Today, we'll be taking a look at some of the high-quality replicas within the Museum of Antiquities collection in order to understand more about the storied history of the Acropolis and its ancient temples.
Construction on the Parthenon began in the year 447 BCE and was designed to be a replacement for the original temple to Athena that had once stood on the hilltop. The original structures atop the Acropolis had been destroyed in 480 BCE by an invading Persian army and had been left in ruins for decades afterwards. The Athenian statesman and general Pericles ordered reconstruction efforts to begin in the mid-5th century BCE, and so a monumental building plan was formulated for the construction of a new citadel, even greater than the one before it. The Athenians commissioned the famed artist Phidias to oversee the construction of the new temples and embellishments alongside a skilled army of stonemasons, sculptors, and artists. The Athenians put the utmost care and detail into the monumental structures and statuary over the next decades, creating artistic representations of the myths and historical battles that defined their place in the world. Scenes like the birth of Athena, or the mythic war between the Lapiths and the Centaurs, were displayed on the Parthenon in beautiful sculpture, and each scene was intended to represent a portion of Athens' epic history. The Athenians portrayed scenes of their supposed ancestors in the same spaces as gods and giants, a bold statement about their lineage and close relationship with the Olympian pantheon.
Perhaps one of the most famous examples of relief sculpture in the world is the Parthenon's interior frieze, which depicts a religious procession from an ancient festival held in tribute to Athena, known as the Panathenai. In this ceremony, a garment woven by the women of Athens, known as the peplos, would be carried up towards the Acropolis in a sacred procession, where they would dress the statue of Athena in her new robes. These panels show one scene of men riding horses, and another of a rider and two groomsmen preparing a third horse to be ridden. These are just small portions of the overall frieze, which is known for its varied and incredibly detailed renderings of the event.
Riders such as the ones shown in this panel are common throughout the Parthenon's frieze, as horsemanship and racing were important aspects of the festival and Athenian life in general. The rider on the right of one panel is depicted wearing a wide-brimmed hat known as a petestos, a common garment for riders in Athens during this time. Both men are shown wearing chitons, of which the finely articulated drapery can be seen. The detailed folds of their clothing are good examples of the realism that Greek artists in the 5th century BCE worked to capture.
The other panel shows three men preparing a horse to take part in the procession, with each figure appearing mostly nude and presented with a dynamic, unique pose. The defined musculature of the men and the horse, as well as the suggestion of movement in the still image, are ready indicators of the stylistic advancements of the classical period of Greek art, which lasted from 480 BCE to the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE.
The master artist Phidias is known to be responsible for the design of the frieze.
Athens was at the height of its ancient power during this period of construction, and would later fall under the domination of foreign powers. The Roman Empire eventually gained control of the city, and its temples remained a hub of pagan religious activity until the rise of Christianity as the empire's most popular religion. The Parthenon was transformed into a Christian church during this time, and even had some of its statuary defaced during the 6th century CE in acts of anti-pagan violence. The Acropolis also seemed to suffer damage from warfare, as evidence suggests that King Alaric the Visigoth sacked the city in the early 5th century CE. The willful acts of destruction inflicted upon the Parthenon in antiquity seems small compared to the disaster that would befall the structure later on during the early modern period.
The Ottoman Empire eventually invaded Greece and took control of Athens. A military garrison was established on the Acropolis, and the Parthenon itself was transformed into a munitions depot. When the Venetian navy bombarded the garrison in the year 1687 CE, a cannonball struck the Parthenon and detonated the stock of gunpowder stored inside. The resulting explosion ripped the Parthenon structure apart, sending fragments of stone and statuary hurtling into the air. What was left was a battered skeleton, as a significant portion of the temple's roof, columns, and walls were blasted apart. The frieze, along with many other artistic elements of the ancient structure, were irreversibly damaged. Even then, the ruins of the temple were still used as a religious site, as a small mosque was built amidst the wreckage.
The Parthenon was not the only structure on the Acropolis that was affected by war during the Ottoman occupation, as the Temple of Athena Nike was completely dismantled by the soldiers in order to use its masonry as extra fortifications. Despite this deliberate destruction, statuary elements from the temple did survive and were recovered during the Acropolis's restoration in the 19th century. This replica panel within the Museum of Antiquities collection, titled Nike Loosening Her Sandal, depicts one element from a procession scene sculpted in relief within the temple. Known to be personifications of victory, these winged Nike are depicted paying homage to Athena Nike, the aspect of Athena tied to the ideal of victory.
Known for its representation of lifelike movement and the incredibly detailed drapery, the original marble is one of classical Greece's most famous works of art. Like the Parthenon frieze, the Nike Loosening Her Sandal has seen extensive damage done since its creation in the late 5th century BCE, losing its head and left hand. The complete dismantlement of the Temple of Athena Nike may not have been as calamitous as the explosion of the Parthenon in the 17th century, and yet the original composition of the temple is forever lost. However, significant work has been done by conservators to recreate the temple using a mixture of original bricks and replica blocks, bringing the structure back to life once more.
The replica in the Museum of Antiquities collection is therefore a powerful statement of the original artifact's longevity. As victory herself stands against the test of time, it is replicas such as this one that help to guarantee the survival of ancient artwork in the face of further calamity. The ruins of both the Parthenon and the Temple of Athena Nike would languish for over a century in this destroyed state, with some of the artwork and masonry being plundered and even ground up and burnt for its composite line by soldiers and locals. Knowing the level of destruction in this period, it is astounding that the finely crafted statuary survived at all. The original parts of the frieze that these replicas are based on are today housed in Athens, but not all of the 5th century statuary is displayed in the new Acropolis Museum. Nearly half of the Parthenon's frieze was taken from the ruins of the temple in the early 19th century by an English nobleman known as Lord Elgin. Believing he was saving the artifacts from the precarious conditions on the Acropolis at the time, approximately half of the frieze was transported to England, where the marbles are now housed in the British Museum in London. The repatriation of the so-called Elgin marbles back to Greece has been a matter of great debate for decades. No matter their current locations, the portions of the Parthenon frieze that survive have endured continued degradation, even after the period of conservation began.
The molds used to produce the Museum of Antiquities frieze panels were taken sometime in the 19th century, when European museums like the Louvre and the Staatliche Museum in Berlin set up workshops for the purpose of taking molds and creating casts of ancient artwork and architecture. Produced in 1975 by the ateliers of the Louvre, our plaster casts are a snapshot of the composition of the original frieze that has since been altered. When comparing the plaster panels in Saskatoon with the marble reliefs in Athens, one can immediately see the stark difference in the surface composition of both. In the decades that followed the molding of the original frieze, modern pollution and natural wear and tear have caused the marble frieze to deteriorate at a rapid pace. By the 1960s, the problem had become so bad that the Greek Archaeological Service was forced to address issues and reassess their efforts to preserve and restore the Acropolis monuments. What had already survived warfare and millennia of weathering faced a new hurdle: the modern combustion engine and the impact of industry. Acid rain and smog have had clear effects on the frieze, and one needs only look at the Museum of Antiquities replica to see that even a century of exposure can cause extreme damage to an artifact. The left rider's head has been entirely obliterated, and significant wearing can be observed in the lighter discoloration covering the panel. The more pristine white segment in the lower right is a modern plaster inclusion intended to represent a horse's hoof that is now destroyed.
The replica panels produced in 1975 thus lack decades worth of degradation, and therefore are closer representations of the appearance of the original 5th century sculptures than the ones currently displayed in Athens. Despite the effort of conservators, there is simply no replacing the material of the original frieze that has been broken off or degraded by pollution. Much of what we know about the ancient Acropolis come from the writings of an ancient traveler named Pausanias, who left behind detailed descriptions of the classical structures on the Acropolis. The vibrant painted statuary, the throngs of worshippers, and the golden ivory statue of Athena Parthenos within the Parthenon itself are all distant things from the restored ruins of today. And yet it is these ancient descriptions, Renaissance drawings, the original artifacts, and the replicas of today that allow modern archaeologists and historians to piece together an image of what the Acropolis's perilous history looked like. Capturing a replica of an ancient and storied monument in any state, whether complete or destroyed, allows future generations to appreciate ancient artwork at multiple specific moments throughout history.
The Museum of Antiquities display of original artifacts and high-quality replicas is a collection unique to Saskatoon. The artifacts featured here serve to allow our community access to ancient cultures that are otherwise far removed from the Saskatchewan prairies. The role that these replicas play in the preservation of ancient art and culture is essential when one considers the constant threat that ancient monuments are under. The recent destruction of Palmyra in 2015, or the fire of the Notre Dame Cathedral in 2019, are just two examples of ancient monuments ruined by accidental means or deliberate violence in recent years. The use of replicas allows threatened sites such as these to be preserved and sometimes even reconstructed as a facsimile of new and old, as is the case with the Parthenon of Athens.
To learn more about the value of replicas and the preservation of ancient art, check out the Museum of Antiquities' latest online exhibit, Resilience and Reflection Through Replica. From the Bronze Age Minoans to the medieval Notre Dame of Paris, see how replicas are helping to preserve artwork threatened by the environment, pollution, and the human element. Thank you for joining me, and please enjoy the Heritage Festival of Saskatoon.